Today's guest has one of the most exciting and fascinating journeys in the entire Flutter ecosystem. He started as a self taught developer. We'll talk a little bit later what technologies he used. Then he got in the Flutter world, built Pocket Piano, which won like a contest. And from there, he started his journey inside Google as a developer relations, more recently working with Anti Gravity. It is my pleasure to introduce Rody Davis today. Rody, how are you?
Well, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Before we start talking about anti-gravity and all that stuff, I have a real good question for you. Is it true that you started working with AppScript and that you were like self-taught with AppScript?
Yeah, it's kind of wild that I was kind of getting into engineering through not realizing that coding was even a path. I grew up not knowing any developers, so I did like working with computers. I figured I could get them to do various tasks, and when I was working at this one company, we were doing like this crazy automated or non-automated process that involved creating calendar events, Google Forms, and emails, and it all needed to coordinate and it was all a manual process by like doing a sheet. And I was like, there has to be a better way. So I was like, discovered AppScript and figured that I could automatically create calendar events based on form submissions. And it was just like the biggest unlock. And from there, I started seeing what other things can I control and like, oh, I can do this thing on the phone and control apps. And so there was a lot of cool stuff.
Go from there to I'm interested in Flutter.
Yeah, so it was probably that summer that I started working in mobile development. I had this idea for making music type applications,
Mhm.
and so I taught myself iOS development. In fact, I had saw this keynote by Apple that showed, I think it was like an 80-year-old Japanese lady had taught herself to code, and there's still an article out there that talks about it. And I was like, if she can do it in her 80s, surely I can try. And so I got like this Swift coding book. I tried out Swift playgrounds. I did all these things to try to get over the hump. And sure enough, I slowly worked my way. I built my first iOS application. And then from there, I was able to start applying and I got this first job doing C#.net. So not Swift, but from there, I started doing native iOS and Android. And not even a year later, I was like, I am so tired of doing Android and iOS by myself. There has to be a faster way. And so I looked at React Native, I looked at Cordova, I looked at Capacitor. There was also the
Those were
Xamarin.
the days.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then Flutter was the only one that I could get, like, reliably working in a short time. It was like Flutter Beta 3.
do you remember what's the first thing that you built with Flutter? Was still like this music app?
I literally so the first thing I built was probably that prototype where I rebuilt the native apps that took me 6 months, I rebuilt in Flutter in 6 weeks. So it was just, like, absolutely wild, the velocity difference, and that was without a lot of plugins, that was without a lot of documentation, it was just having a single code base and being able to, like, map what I was trying to do a lot easier.
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, you were pretty active since 2018 or things like that. Art back then was like the new keyword everywhere.
Yes,
No null
yes.
safety or anything like that, right?
Oh, yes, yeah, a lot of it was like, I kinda know how to map this, I've done something similar in C# or whatever, and so, really, it was a lot of trial and error and just figuring out best practices.
Nice. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Pocket Piano, right? Because with that app, you won the Flutter Create contest for code quality. I think that you were able to ship that in like a very small like memory footprint and all that. What was the process and how kind of like building the project help you to think about what good looks like when building Flutter apps?
So, I've always been interested in algorithms and finding ways to code things really efficiently. So when there was a challenge to do something in 5 kilobits, which is like less than a second and a half of an MP3, I was super excited about this challenge. And so I love making music apps. And so like piano rolls, I just started subdividing the problem more and more. And I was like, I bet I could configure this. I bet I could reuse this. And like finally it just like fit in just this tiny block of code. And I was able to build a full 88 key piano roll with like touch and everything. So it was pretty cool.
And that It sounds like a lot of fun, but also like the optimizations there, they sound a little bit bananas
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Do you remember
And
any
then
particular
what was
optimization?
crazy is I made the app so quickly that I was actually able to make a blog post and publish it even before like the deadline had completed, which I know had probably helped a lot of people even see it, which was fun.
Nice, nice. All right, so that was kind of like your moment, kind of like with Flutter. You've been very active. If anyone takes your GitHub repo before Google, after Google, you've always been running like experiments, creative process, and things like that, right? And then inside Google, I know that you've kind of like been with Material, with IDX, and now with Anti Gravity. Is there a thread that connects all that for you with Flutter?
Yeah, for me, I've been passionate about just being a builder, like what the tech, whether it was working with web components and building with web standards, working with Flutter, working with desktop, native, you name it. I've always been excited about controlling hardware and showing what's on a screen and controlling the experience. And so, obviously AI has become really important. But for me, it was just another thread and ways to shape and to build things that I couldn't build before or to be able to like augment experiences that weren't possible. It's been really exciting just to explore the vast space of, largely undiscovered territory.
Yeah, for me, as someone that gets to consume what you do and your content, it's great to see you becoming almost like this pop person for some of these really cool initiatives, most lately anti-gravity, right? That is like, man, do you have the dream job really? So
I
I think
sure
you do.
think I did even from my first role at Google.
That's great. That's great. Well, congratulations. I mean, well deserved as well. Like you're doing an excellent job. So anti-gravity, what is it? Like, how would you explain it to someone that might not have heard about it, although I doubt it these days, but like, what's anti-gravity for people that haven't tried it? Like, what makes it fundamentally different than just working with a traditional IDE?
So, one of the cool things about anti gravity is it's our take on multi-agent we're kind of like development. It's our take on building with an IDE that's familiar, like a VS Code like interface. It's also taking in the best of what Google has to offer. So like native extensions like Nano Banana or connecting to Google search, grounding the results, building the latest models like as soon as they're available. We try to be at least day one on these new
Mhm,
stuff. So we're trying to bring all these pieces together, which we've had similar projects at Google that have done parts of this, but
mhm.
anti-gravity is really starting to like be a focus and honing in all these services under one product.
It almost looks like the unifying platform with all the different kind of like bits and pieces that are coming from AI at Google, right? So
Oh yes, yeah.
yeah. So you've been talking about multi-agents. And how does that work? Because within the IDE, we're all used to seeing like our code window and like, oh, we run this, the linting, whatever that code compiles, it doesn't compile. But when we're talking about agents, it's a fundamentally different experience. And I think like Google's take or anti-gravity's take on this is also like different from what we see in other platforms as well.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to think about it where like one is you can kick off multiple agents almost like you would like an email inbox of like, here's all the things across my system that need input from me or things that I'm working on. And you can even have multiple agents inside of a project too.
Mhm.
So oftentimes you can be working on one task and have another one do a different task or get really crazy and use Git work trees and like have them, doing different branches. So there's just this concept of like some people may never want the code. They just want to stay at this agent manager level where, okay, build me a presentation or work on this doc and iterate this stuff. And they don't necessarily need to see what's being written, but the agent manager still provides that interface to request and to do things on your file system. Anti-gravity has really good support for controlling the web browser. So
Mhm.
like you can just say like check my latest emails or do whatever and it like can open it up and grab screenshots
Mhm.
and grab data, even getting the DOM. And so it lets you just kind of open up a lot of the possibilities.
And I think that that's one of the biggest differences that I've seen is like for people that want to still have an agentic experience within the code. I don't know if this is the terminology that it's used, but like it's the editor view. But then if you want to be fully agentic, I don't care about the underlying implementation. I just want to see the outcome. That would be your manager view, right? Uh, what does it mean to manage agents other than like writing code?
Yeah, so I guess a different way to think about it is like you could easily toggle between them because like we made it just like Command E or Control E on
Mhm.
Windows. You can swap the views. And so sometimes you're like, I want you to run the test coverage and fix any issues and continue until that's complete. I'm going to go start on a different project and do something else while that's continuing. It may take an hour to complete, depending on how much coverage it needs to fill that gap. But then other times, like I have something that's requiring a lot of my human input, and that I'm going to be wanting to be like directly in that manager, like accepting and approving and working on the plan.
You have a blog post or an article in LinkedIn that I really like that you talk that you make this kind of like analogy with like being a developer or an engineer in 2026 is kind of like being like a bonsai caregiver, something like that, where like the way you phrase it, and I'm just gonna read it literally, is like the art of making things small, controlled, and guided takes a lot of skill. What do you think are those skills that engineers that are still kind of like navigating this transition to an agentic world need to incorporate in their toolkit or like toolset to be successful when working with agentic experiences?
So, one of the things that's really important is understanding that agents can write code really easily. They have a hard time deleting code, and that is something that requires intention, forethought, to be able to see the system at a
Mhm.
whole and be like, how can I simplify this? How can I make this simplex, not complex? I want to make this the smallest possible version that can cover the most amount of use cases. That is actually really difficult to do. Like, for example, if you're building a car engine, it's really easy to get a lot of horsepower. You just scale it up, you add really big cylinders, but like to do a very efficient engine with a lot of horsepower requires a lot of engineering, like Formula One. And so I think if you start to approach your code like that, you can really see, okay, yes, I can generate new stuff all the time. That's great. But really, how do I like want to take this as my North Star? Like, how can I really drive this where I want to be and refine it with multiple passes so that I'm getting to a place that is easy to edit and to be able to come back to? And not just the agents having cognitive load, it for me having the low cognitive load so I can understand it when I come back to it in a month.
I love how you're phrasing it. We've been talking about this quite often at VGB, and we keep using accountability as something that needs to be a pillar of us working with AI. Because if we just let, I mean, there might be opportunities or cases where like you can just let the AI, hey, fly crazy, YOLO, and whatever. But when you're building something that is like a system, something that is gonna go to production, touch multiple users or be mission critical, right? We still see that ability to understand the system, right? Like the AI is not a replacement, it's an assistance to what we do as
Yes.
engineers. So all of a sudden, being a strong engineer is more important than ever.
Yeah, because you're also like AI when you're providing a context is only seeing a snapshot of what the system is currently, even if it can understand it completely. Your goal is to say where you want to take it. And so that's going to mean architectural shifts. It's going to mean this drift in the code that's being currently written to disk. And when you have that like expert like guidance that you're providing it, you
Mhm.
can really do a whole lot with less tokens because you can say, I want you to just do this part. And like, we're going to focus on this in phases and you can kind of work your way to where you want to be.
So let's talk a little bit then, and we're going to be doing a demo in a little bit. But one of the things that anti-gravity seems as well that, I mean, it's not new, but like definitely like not everyone has adopted this part yet, is the idea of using planning mode. And then you have the fast mode as well with anti-gravity, right? Do you have any guidance for developers to kind of like decide when do I need to go to plan mode or when do I go straight to kind of like let's work on changes? I think it depends on maybe the working style, size, but I wonder if you have tips and tricks for that.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things about anti-gravity, like you said, is the use of artifacts. We have a variety of things that can get created, including an implementation plan, a walkthrough, hash file, as well as this planning document. And one of the other things that you can do is inside your anti-gravity settings. you can change your preference on what is being executed. So, for example, people mistake planning mode for a ask or plan mode. And in anti-gravity settings, you can change it to say, I always want you to request a review. And that gets you to where people are more familiar with like it always kind of iterating and then kind of proceeding. I have mine set to always proceed because it's easier for me to steer the output based on the context I'm providing it
Mhm.
usually. But usually the rule of thumb for going between fast and planning is fast is for anything that and it works best with Gemini Flash I found, but it works best for anything that like it's just a direct like series of commands that need to be run or like it's a pretty straight line for like can you update the ARB files? Can you update the tokens? Can you run the formatting, check the tests, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
But planning mode is really great for any time the agent can, and a lot of people don't understand this, is that it can run and execute code to generate a plan because it's gathering artifacts to be able to build that context to then go out and do something. So it may create like an overview document of like your database schema and it might connect to things and run terminal commands. It might run through your screens or try to figure out what's going on before you even get started because it's basically just front loading that context to be able to do your task. And then from there, you can comment on it and you can say, like, I don't want you to do this. I want you to expand on this. And then when you're ready, you can just proceed with that implementation.
One of the exciting things that I observe when using artifacts, right, is that all of a sudden the code base starting to be closer to things that are important to the code, like product requirements, implementation plans, screenshots, and all that. That in the past was like outsourced many times to systems like Jira, to different ticket management systems. And there wasn't necessarily like a single source of truth, or it was hard to synchronize your source of truth. That is the code at the end of the day, because that's what compiles and executes on the user's behalf or whatever,
Hmm.
with what your intent was, right? But now we're starting to see that those are getting closer and closer. So now I have this question to you: is like, do you think that I love how we think of artifacts as like truth mechanisms and trust mechanisms. Do you think they will ever become like somehow like the source of truth and not the code, or we're far from that? Like, I don't know. I wonder what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think thinking about source of truth has been this like ongoing developer and designer and product manager
Yeah.
struggle where like everybody has their own version of truth and also it depends on what part of the product life cycle it is, what part of the stage of development it is. So with that I'll say that like I think that there's been a lot of work in and outside of Google on like what are the various ways that we can represent content. And I think
Mhm.
Intergravity makes it easy to connect to those sources through MCP servers. And more recently, I think skills are a really great way to provide that, where you can actually say, instead of this being this like living document, what if we just broke up all the pieces into individual slices of context? And then we can just store that in our project. We can store that in Drive. We can send that to teammates. And then that way you can work on your system as a series of smaller units as opposed to
Mhm.
this overarching kind of document. But there's many different ways that people create that, and I think, it's been exciting to see all that progress.
Awesome. Let's talk about anti-gravity and Flutter, because of course this
Okay,
wouldn't be a very good engineering talk without like having Flutter in the middle.
of course.
Flutter being like a Google project, and then like anti-gravity being like a Google project as well. What's that relationship between both of them? Having someone like you with a deep like background in Flutter shape like how anti-gravity is kind of like interacting with Google, how not with Google, with anti-gravity, how kind of like that developer experience gets like a little bit more tailor-made for Flutter developers. What's the connection there?
I think, a good way to think about it is anti-gravity and all these products at Google right now. We're trying to find ways to, like, work better together and to make these developer experiences possible and more, with taking away more friction. And so one of the ways Flutter and anti-gravity work together is finding gaps when anti-gravity is outputting bad code. We can find ways to see how can we improve that. We can provide that feedback to the team. We can also do engineering work like update MCP servers, like, launch skills, try to find different ways to connect to the agent context. And then also on the anti-gravity side, they can find better ways to control a Flutter web app, for
Yeah,
example, or like connect to different protocols. And so like there's like just this great two-way relationship going across all these different teams, but especially Flutter and anti-gravity.
that's fantastic. I would keep asking questions and questions, but I'm pretty sure that people will want to see anti-gravity in action. And I've heard that you prepare a little demo for us. Mm,
Yeah, yeah.
let's go
Happy
ahead.
to share.
Awesome. So get us a little bit through this demo.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go ahead and do this one. So I can start with Stitch because this will kind of give a high level overview of what the project is. So I one of the efforts that I help with at Google is Gen UI, which is for people that haven't used it yet, is generative UI, specifically in Flutter. And that allows the agent to generate UI components or at least compose UI components based on requests and conversations. So one of the goals with Glow specifically was to try to break away from that kind of chat driven experience
Mm,
and see if we can get to like kind of full screen experiences that like generate inside the application that don't feel like you're just in a chat. And then so as you can see already, this looks pretty wild, like we have a lot of interesting artifacts with backgrounds. We have interesting kind of glow effects because obviously it's glow. This looks interesting. Maybe there's like different ways we can animate that and also glossy effects with like transparency. So already you can kind of see like this seems like a cool app that we want to build. And so one of the first things that I did after working with Stitch is like this was really the first version of Gemini 3 that had come out. And I just started like seeing how I could generate Flutter code with it. And so from here, I can even just like I wanted to show off. We have Stitch has an MCP support inside of
mhm.
anti gravity, which allows you to just like copy these prompts. So if I wanted to say export these screens, I can go in, export MCP, and it also has an option to set up for anti gravity. But you can literally just copy the prompt now, and this will basically generate those as HTML and images in your application. So that's already pretty cool, but I wanted to take it further because Flutter is not HTML. And also I wanted to have a goal of not doing the typical just generate things as image assets. So for example, let me go back to Stitch real quick. All of these, if you're normally building this, you might say, okay, I'm going to generate this as an image background. I'm going to generate this maybe as a background,
Mhm.
and I'm going to find different ways. And I might, do some containers on top. But I really wanted to find a way to see how far could I push this. And so I had I had Gemini just literally recreate all these as shaders. So
Shaders.
there's not a single image asset in the entire application. And I built this entire application with anti-gravity, which I'll show in a second. But I not only am working with like this new SDK that is like brand new, I'm also being able to provide the context and like kind of build the Flutter app as I go. And then just examples of really great tasks that anti-gravity does. When I had it finished, I was like, okay, find all the hard-coded strings and then generate an ARB file and set up internationalization and find any hard-coded colors and generate a design system and do all that kind of stuff. So like all these types of tasks, like let me take the prototype and to quickly get into
Mhm.
something that
Yeah,
was kind of ready. Here is the application, which is cool, and it's responsive and looks great on tablet and
nice.
desktop. I'm just running it on macOS right now. You can even change the API key. So if I go in here, hopefully this will work for the demo. We'll see. Um, this whole thing is powered by Gemini 3, and it also is all based on GenUI. So this quiz is completely generated dynamically. So I wanted to start off with like a breadth set of
Mhm.
questions and get really narrow.
So
So let's do
can you
like
talk just a little bit? Because I
yeah,
think when we talk about Gen UI, I have a little bit of experience with it, and it's almost like an entirely different paradigm because what you're doing is like let the LLM pick your widget out of your widget catalog and you explain the intent of some of those widgets. But then it's the LLM deciding for the context that I have and the intent that I interpret from the user, I might decide to paint this experience or something different, right?
yeah,
So can you just show a little bit how Gen UI works? How do you build this screen with Gen UI?
yeah. So let's see. If I go into like the quiz screen, um, see if I can find like so GenUI has like the concept of like a surface and a host. So you can provide like this ongoing conversation and then basically the UI can submit actions and then kind of update this context. But let me see if I can find some of the dynamic stuff.
Yeah.
Here's GenUI. Here's like our catalog.
And this is
Um,
your catalog, but I think people need to understand that the only widget that you actually plant on the widget tree, what's that Gen UI surface?
hold up. Say that one more time.
Oh, now I was saying that what you're doing with Gen UI is like pretty much the only widget tree that you are planting on the widget tree is that Gen UI surface widget. The rest of it is based on the conversation that you're
Oh
having, the
yes,
LLM deciding.
yeah. In fact, everything. So like I define like a top level concept of like quizzes of I'm going to ask for data, but then inside my component, I can say, do I want to render this as a multi choice question, as a single choice, as a toggle, as a drop down? Because I found that like with GenUI, you want to kind of stay at the semantic level and layer as opposed to like diving into like set this background as green and this one as whatever. You want to kind of more send the vibes and
Yeah.
like render. And so what's cool is like as you proceed in this thing, like these questions were based on the previous questions. So
Mhm.
like this isn't something that I could have pre-programmed. I mean, in theory, you could generate this massive combinatory matrix of questions, but it would be static, you know, and like you want this to be personalized. You could change this every time you run the application. You could build up a profile for the user of their preferences and what they've liked and what they've generated before. And so you could build an application that people feel like it's personal to them. And I feel like that's where GenUI offers that really nice opportunity for Flutter developers.
And I think
And
to
then,
me, where the
yeah,
paradigm, like the potential is like it's true personalization as opposed
yeah,
to in the past, we've called personalization to things that they were segmentation. It's like you as
yes.
a user fall in one particular category based on how you segment users. But now your intent might give you a complete different experience. And that,
It's like what we've always wanted. Yeah.
yeah, so many opportunities there.
Yeah. And so, and when I feel like I've had enough questions, I want to show I can do skip to generation. And this part is really cool because this shows one of the shaders. This
Mhm.
one is completely rendered and generated completely dynamically. And even the background is a mesh gradient shader as well. So, like, it just really changes the vibe. And so it should be done here in a second. But I was so excited when I got this working because I literally just started with a screenshot and I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, but can we like make this animate? Can we make the inside spin faster than the outside? Can we do this? And like that's where it's so fun working with generative UI to kind of get to that place. Um,
Whoa.
and then so the other cool thing you can do is another fun shader is like these controls are based on what the output is. So this is
Mhm.
even dynamic too. I mean, it can be cleaned up, but check this out. When you're ready, I hit regenerate and I have this shader too.
I gotta say that as someone that has tried to work with shaders, and I'm like, nope. Like I can
Yeah,
do some
yeah,
basic stuff. Like the fact that now you can like just use natural language to get the shader that you want, and let it go with it, like it's a game changer as well.
Oh, yeah, and I've wanted to do shaders, but, like, I at least can describe it enough to know what I
Yeah.
want. Like, I didn't even know enough to debug shaders. I just knew, like, send a screenshot, show what I was looking at, like, how can I improve this? So, yeah.
Nice. This is awesome. And like
Yeah,
all
so
that, I think one of the things that like for people that maybe didn't catch up this thing, like anti-gravity is the IDE. And like if you've been working with VS Code, you're like at home, like the thing that changes, like, yeah, you have new views and all the stuff, but like you are continue working as usual when needed. And now you have the agentic improvements and experiences available to use for like to use for you.
yeah, totally, yeah, and I think, um I obviously was a VS Code user for a long time, and anti-gravity felt like a really nice progression from that. In many ways, it was everything I was looking for because it had a deeper browser experience, a deeper connection with
Mhm.
like the specific type of agentic tooling I was looking for. And then also just like I can grab anything. I can just say like Command L and like add it as context to the chat. You can even send the terminal sessions, which, happens all the time. And you can just, yeah, it's just a lot less copy and pasting.
Nice. So are you the question I guess would be, and this is kind of like a hot topic in the community, how much of this code are you letting the agent kind of like write for you with your context and direction? And are there any changes where like, or like opportunities where you have to steer manually and kind of like, no, this is better suited if I do it just by myself?
I guess I only ever think of it in phases, right? Like
Uh-huh.
I generate a bunch of code, I review a bunch of code, I rewrite parts of code, I write new code, I then generate new code based on the code I've written. So it's like this messy process that like kind of goes back and forth. I will say Gemini 3 was the first model to be a tipping point where I was having maybe 20% of my code being written by AI. I would say it's closer to 80% now. But I feel this 80% is 90% closer to what I've been wanting, whereas the 20% before was maybe only 10 or 15% what I wanted. So I'm writing a lot more code, but it's also a lot more of the code that I would have authored, and it's in the style of what I want to do.
For me, a bit of a personal story, but I was on paternity leave in starting October, and I've been keeping an eye on all these. Like I'm responsible for some of the outcomes inside the team. And I was like, yeah, we're getting licenses. People are kind of like using the chat interface more and all the stuff, but you can tell that there's something missing. It's not yet ready. Come back from paternity leave in January. I was kind of like, what has happened? The world has changed. And now that thing where we were saying like it's not ready, it actually is not that it's not ready. It's like one of the things that I appreciate is like it's allowing me to do things that I didn't know how to do before, that it would
Yeah.
require me to do like deep study for days or even weeks just to start kind of like mastering the basics. Shaders is a perfect example. It's like you
Mhm.
can get like a simple shader to work. You might not even understand still what it does, but then as you want to make something more complex, like, oh, this requires more work. And I feel even in the Flutter community, that type of knowledge was reserved for just a few experts. And of the science,
Mhm.
like you can work with the speeds, get like a concept, a prototype, and then develop it from there. So it's like a new, almost like superpower that I think as long as you keep learning out of it, it's like, okay, now I can do something complex and learn as we go, still remain accountable. But I
Mhm.
think for those that are a little bit more like brave and adventurous, it's like, well, I no longer fear this thing that I don't know anymore. It's like, no, I'll
Oh,
figure it out.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I feel like I didn't fear it before. I just knew that it would be 6 weeks of my time versus an afternoon now.
Yeah.
So, like, I can fail faster. I can build a prototype and see, "Oh, yeah, it's not really what I wanted to do," and I've been really excited for bringing that, process so much faster of like a loop of like, I want to explore this idea. I want to see if we can add this feature. And yeah, I agree. Like it's definitely made that better. But at the same time, I feel like it's been really important to like understand the code
Hmm.
even more. Like a lot of people think that the code is not important. And I think maybe for certain types of things it's not. Like if you have a web application or mobile application that's only doing REST APIs or calls to your backend for all the logic, the UI is just going to be the UI. It's just going to like can you click the button? Can you reflect the correct state? Stuff like that. But I feel like, for applications that require that excellence, like local first applications, like offline, like
Yeah.
building like games and like building this like kind of experiences, understanding that full life cycle and bringing that context is now more important than ever. Understanding, yes, you could build with anything, but if I choose these services, I can scale it really well.
Yeah, I think if something of working at scale prior AI has taught us is that more contributions to code base, they require more defense. And defense usually means really understanding your system, really
Mhm.
understanding the infrastructure that powers it, having simple solutions to complex problems. And that's easy to say, but it's freaking really hard to do
Yes, it is. Yeah.
because standards, like, it's kind of like adding another abstraction, right? And I think what we're going to experience with AI is that problems that in the past they were only kind of like suffered by large teams because the types of contributions that they would have, like
Mhm.
bottlenecks in CI/CD, discrepancies in architecture because everybody follows a different standard. And with AI, a small team can suffer those pain points faster just because if you don't have the proper guardrails, the proper kind of like standards patterns in place, you're just gonna experience that, right? So to me, it's
Oh, yeah.
actually it's an opportunity. It's gonna allow everyone to work at scale, but at the same time, it's gonna require even more than ever like the right judgment, the right taste to make sure that your system doesn't degrade as your contributions increase in the code base.
Yeah. And I hope that one of the things for open source, like in this new age, I hope that we like kind of take more of like the Unix philosophy and like how do we like build these very specific tools that everybody can use and depend on and just pipe them along. And because I feel like right now, one of the mistakes that juniors and even senior developers can make is I'm going to build this example and then not realize that like there's three different things that have already been able to do this and also there's a built-in system call that can do it, or like whatever, and
Oh yeah.
understanding when to reach for a tool versus when to build is just as important as it always has
And
been.
things like we're also like going to a world where like building a tool is so cheap. Things that I
Maintenance
have
is not.
observed is that I'm writing more disposable software than ever. Because if I'm in
Mm,
a, let's say, a complex migration or something like that, and I need some sort of like complex dependency visualization graph, or I'm migrating and I need pixel perfection, I can just build within minutes a side by side pixel comparison. That in the
mm,
past, it would be like a tool that you buy or something like that, and now, or a golden test even with Flutter, right? And I was like, well, I can just let it rip
yeah,
and within 30 minutes of it, right? So it's gonna be an strange world to live in. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that have already invented, but I need this specific use case that I
it's this
think it's
one
gonna
part.
be
Yeah, yeah.
unique. Yeah, yeah. It's gonna be a very
But
interesting
at the
world.
same time, writing code has never been the hard part of the
Yeah,
problem, which I feel like really understanding that it's maintenance, while it is cheaper with a lot of the agentic tooling, it's not zero. And as you build with anything that's not the web and non build steps, like you come back to it in a year and 20 different dependencies have shifted underneath you and like the state of the world has changed. And also, community is really important, right? You can build something, but if you don't have the critical mass of users, like you don't have that feedback system,
yeah,
you don't have those advocates, you don't have the triage. And so you're just taking on that mountain of work by yourself, if that is the goal. Or, you just kind of throw it away and say, I'm just gonna create a bunch of primitives that makes it really easy for me to build tools for
yeah.
myself and just be able to throw them away.
Yeah, I think more than ever, the evolution is going to be to be more engineers and less developers. And
Hmm.
there's a subtle difference with that wording, where like the emphasis is going to be even more in like, are we solving the right problem and are we solving it the right way? Right. As developers, you kind of like take requirements that someone else probably outside the engineering world might have declared, and you're just like the translator. And I think that that's the part that is going to be obsolete.
Yeah.
Awesome. Roddy, before we put a pin to this episode today, one of the things that we're doing with everyone is a little game that we call it like lightning round. It's like a
Okay.
series of short and fast questions. So the question, like the first one is, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So first question is like, what's your favorite Flutter package that you didn't build?
So there's this package I made called OpenXML, which is a fully PPTX, XLX, and DocX compliant package that I had anti-gravity build 100% of based on these 40 megabyte PDFs in
I'm glad
2 days.
that you didn't that by hand. Yeah. That sounds great. Editor view or manager view? Where do you spend more time?
So I want to be an agent manager more, but I do love the editor just because I can just easily go to the agent manager when I want to go to that higher level. So
Yeah, sounds good.
and I just like dropping a folder onto the editor and then opening it up. So
Cool, cool. One thing that you would change about the Flutter ecosystem right now.
I think it'd be really cool to show junior and mid developers that are building with Flutter that like responsive design is possible. And I think a lot of people don't realize it. Like, and I mean infinitely responsive,
Yeah.
like where you can start from a mobile screen and expand up to a desktop application and you can maintain your state, you can maintain all the other stuff. I think there's a lot of people that didn't come from web design that are used to responsive that they're kind of
Yeah.
approach Flutter like building with mobile and tablet first mentality.
Yeah, I think it's great. I've had the privilege of working in kind of like crazy multi-platform, multi-device environments where like you go from small as a watch and as large as like a kiosk somewhere. And that is like it makes you really think about your code base, how you like structure your design system. I must confess this kind of like mission in life. I'm gonna make this happen one day. I wanna run a Flutter app in Las Vegas Sphere.
That would be sick. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the ultimate like responsive design challenge.
At the very minimum, some type of like crazy shader or Dart powered thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of Flutter, right? Like whether it's like your phone or the Madison Square Garden Jumbotron, you can pour your experiences. So I think that we haven't even tapped yet the potential of what that means. And I think now with AI, I think the opportunities for building more products are going to increase. I think everyone is scared about like, oh, the engineering world is going to disappear. I actually think it's going to be the opposite. We're going to be building more products than ever, and like, our touch points are going to change. And I think Flutter is perfectly positioned to go to those like unusual experiences that now we can all of a sudden unlock because it's not expensive anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people's habits move very slowly. My engineering job, Git had been around for 10 years and my manager was like, I will never learn Git. It's not important. And they're still doing like everything the old way, it's like you can all these new things come along, but it still takes time to like propagate in businesses. So
I have people from business development at VGV learning Git because now they see, oh, I can do with AI, like I can create like super specialized prospect pages for like potential clients and all the stuff. And I've decided like they have like a new superpower that they couldn't tackle before. So yeah. By the
yeah,
way, if
that's awesome.
someone from Las Vegas Sphere is watching this, please give me a call.
Yes.
You're also a musician and an engineer. First of all, what did you play?
Trained on percussion and so I can play like pretty much everything there, but I've can also do things like piano and guitar and stuff like that. But I also love a lot of non-traditional instruments that include things like the Ableton Launchpad or any types of like MIDI experiences. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see that the 80s influence your music career and your software career based on the glow up.
Yeah, thanks.
So, how has music influenced how you think about software architecture?
Yeah, I would say even art in general, just like approaching engineering as a creative endeavor and artistic expression literally helps like shape how I build architecture, how I build and design my applications because I'm focused on the experience and wanting to put my name on it or like to like show that this thing is possible. And whether it's a song or some type of thing that you're building, like you think about the full arc, you think about all the little pieces that make up the sub problems and you solve them one by one and you compose them together. And it's like that's the magic that comes together.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, music is a very important part of my life. Now that I have two kids, the big one, although he's 3, he loves just making noise with every instrument he can get. His hands are like
Nice.
you can see how he just like activates part of your brain that without
Oh, yes.
music wouldn't be active. Yeah, yeah, awesome. Do you have any unpopular opinions about AI assisted engineering?
I would say that deleting context is more valuable than adding context.
100%. Yeah, yeah. This, I feel like we're gonna learn to be very effective with language,
Mhm.
because the economics of language and like you picking the right word to express intent is gonna be a skill in itself. I mean, people call it like prompt engineering, but like it's gonna shape how we speak to computers
Oh,
for
yes.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Awesome. And the last question that I have for you is like, if you could go back to your days working with AppScript, what would you tell that young Roddy to kind of like get prepared to the engineering world that he's gonna face?
I still feel like I would have followed the same path because and I probably would have just do what I'm gonna do because I've been driven by curiosity and I've been driven by passion. And at every step, when I didn't understand something, I just tried to approach it like black box learning, where I'm like, I know the part that I do know, and I know the part I don't. So I'm going to constantly work to change everything I can and then work layers lower and lower and lower. And that just helped me approach all the things because, like, when it was iOS programming, I didn't know how to like do anything in UI kit. This was Swift before Swift UI, but I knew that if I changed the text on this label, something would show up differently. I know that if I connected this, it would update. And then eventually, Flutter made it easier to like look at all the layers. I could see how a widget is actually rendered, and I could see how this method is actually called. So it was just staying curious, staying passionate, because like that's the thing that's going to get you motivated through those times when you feel like AI is just not giving you what you need.
I do think that passion and creativity and just like feeling brave, like feeling like, hey, I'm gonna explore and I'm just gonna enjoy the destination. That's what I've seen people that even if they're not like the most brilliant engineers, but they tend to be the most successful because they have something that is contagious that
Oh,
works not
yes.
only
Yeah.
for them but for everybody around them. And man, like that when you see it in action, is like I want to be like that. That's what I want to do for sure. So
And I also was just not afraid of asking questions.
yeah,
Like, even at Google, I constantly am finding people that are way smarter than me so I can figure out like how I can learn how they learned, and like learning how to fit all these things together is so important.
that's great. Rory, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today, from being a musician to getting started, like and being self-taught with AppScript, knowing about bonsais. I don't know if you take care of bonsais, but I like the analogy. And finally, like sharing like tips and tricks about anti-gravity. I feel like there's still a lot of like hidden superpowers that might require a deep dive, but all I have today is words of gratitude and thank you so much. And for everyone else watching, please feel free to follow Roddy on like social, LinkedIn, GitHub, Twitter, whatever that is. Very prolific, very active, one of the people that I admire from the community. Feel free to subscribe to our very good engineering channel, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.